The waitress they laughed at for her scars turned out to be the reason a soldier made it home alive. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle every time someone walked into Maggie's Route 74 diner just outside of Florence, South Carolina. It was the kind of place where truckers came in for black coffee and eggs at dawn, and local retirees argued over scratch-offs and bacon by 9 a.m. You could see the same dozen faces most days, give or take a couple of strangers passing through. But no one forgot Monica. Monica Traylor, 36, moved like she'd been here forever. Polite, efficient, but distant, like she was always keeping a piece of herself tucked out of reach. She worked the early lunch shift, started at 10 sharp, and clocked out before the dinner crowd came in. People noticed her all right, but not for her service. It was the scars. Long, twisted lines ran down both her forearms. They looked like burns, angry, uneven patches of skin that disappeared beneath her rolled sleeves. Some said they were from a car wreck. Others whispered darker things: drug use, jail time, self-harm. Folks never asked her directly, but they didn't need to. In a town this size, whispers travel faster than facts. Monica never corrected them. She never talked about it. She just smiled when she had to, took orders, and kept moving. A couple of regulars treated her kindly. Mr. Jenkins, who always sat in booth 3 and tipped well. Old Ms. Rosemary, who liked her coffee half milk and insisted on calling Monica baby girl. But most were content to leave her alone. Some looked at her like she didn't belong behind the counter, like her presence was something they just had to tolerate for the sake of a hot plate. That morning, it was already humid by the time Monica walked in. The kind of sticky southern heat that makes everything feel a little slower. She tied her apron, grabbed a coffee pot, and started making the rounds. No fuss, just another Tuesday. She didn't see the old man at the counter until almost noon. He wasn't one of the regulars. Thin, maybe late 60s or early 70s, with sun-leathered skin and sharp eyes that seemed to be scanning the room more than watching it. He had a military ball cap on, 4th Infantry Division, faded lettering, and a cane leaned against his stool. Monica offered her usual. "Can I get you started with some coffee?" He gave a quiet nod, then finally looked up at her. "You new here?" she asked. "Just passing through," he replied, voice raspy but calm. "Name's Frank." "Nice to meet you, Frank. Let me know when you're ready to order." She poured his cup, turned to leave, and his eyes followed her for a second longer than most would think to. At that moment, no one knew how the next few minutes would change everything. But trouble was already walking in the door. They came in loud, 4 of them, probably in their early 20s, dressed like they wanted people to know they didn't care about much. Cut-off shirts, ball caps turned backward, one of them dragging his boots like it was too much effort to lift his feet. Locals, not regulars. Monica clocked them immediately. They smelled like cheap beer and gas station cologne. They pushed 2 tables together and sat down like they owned the place. "Y'all got chicken fried steak?" one of them hollered before he even picked up a menu. Monica didn't flinch. She'd dealt with their type before. She walked over, pen in hand, polite but detached. "Yeah, we got it. Comes with mashed potatoes or fries." The guy grinned and elbowed his friend. "I'll take that, sweetheart. And bring some hot sauce. Not that weak stuff." One of the others leaned forward, squinting at her arms. "Damn. What happened to you?" he said, no attempt to lower his voice. "That from a meth lab or what?" The table burst into laughter, loud, mean. Monica stiffened, but didn't answer. She just jotted down the order. "Come on, I'm serious," the first guy pushed. "That don't look like no accident. You run into a fire or something? Or maybe you got wild with the razor blades back in juvie." More laughter. Frank, still at the counter, slowly lowered his coffee cup. Monica turned without a word and walked back to the kitchen. Her face didn't change, but her hands trembled slightly around her notepad. The cook, Earl, caught a glimpse of her but didn't say anything. Earl had seen her come and go, watched her work in silence for months. He knew not to pry, but out in the dining area, the jokes kept coming. "They let that serve food?" one said. "Man, I hope she don't bleed in my gravy. She probably sleeps out back behind the dumpster. Look at her arms. She looks like she'd been in a knife fight with herself." They didn't lower their voices because they didn't think they had to. People looked up from their booths, some pretending not to hear. Some just kept eating. A few shook their heads, but no one said anything. That's how it usually went. Frank watched the table quietly. His hands were folded, his jaw clenched. Monica came back out with the drinks, silent as ever. She placed the cups on the table one by one, not reacting when one of the men said, "Careful now, don't spill nothing. We don't want no acid burns." When she turned to walk away, one of them made a loud, sizzling noise with his mouth. And the rest howled again. She stopped just for a second, just long enough that Frank noticed the shift in her shoulders. He stood up, no rush, no drama, just placed his palm flat on the counter and stood. "Hey." The laughter slowed. Frank picked up his cane and walked over to the group. "You boys think you're funny?" The one in the front leaned back and smirked. "Relax, old man, we're just talking." Frank looked over at Monica, then back at the group. His voice was low, steady. "You ever serve?" The table went quiet. "What?" one of them asked. "I said, did you ever serve? Military?" "Hell no," the guy scoffed. "Ain't nobody trying to get blown up in the desert." Frank nodded slowly. "Didn't think so." The diner was still now. Forks rested on plates. Even Earl peeked out from the kitchen door. Frank turned slightly toward Monica. "What's that ink on your arm?" he asked, voice just loud enough for the whole room to hear. She hesitated, eyes flicking toward him. "It's 19th Forward Support Battalion, Afghanistan." Frank blinked. 2011? She nodded slowly. He exhaled hard through his nose. "Well, damn." And then he said the words that changed the room. "My daughter was in that unit." But the full weight of that sentence hadn't even hit yet. The diner was silent, except for the faint clink of someone setting down their fork. Frank's voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. There was a firmness to it now, a kind of weight that made people listen. "My daughter, Rebecca Delgado, combat medic, served with the 19th, Kandahar, Helmand, Logar, 2011. You were there?" Monica nodded slowly, her eyes scanning his face, trying to place it. "I was attached to Bravo Company," she said. "Convoy ops. Route clearance." Frank leaned on his cane, staring at her like he'd just spotted a ghost in the middle of a Waffle House. "Your trailer." It wasn't a question. She froze. "No one ever called me that outside the wire," she said quietly. Frank stepped in a little closer. "Becky told me about a woman in her unit. Said you dragged her and 2 others out of a burning MRAP after a roadside hit. She said you came back twice under fire, got hit with shrapnel, arms and chest." Monica glanced down at her arms, then back up at him. "That was a long time ago." Frank didn't blink. "She said she wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for you." For a second, nobody in the diner moved. The 4 guys at the table suddenly had nothing to say. All that mock confidence drained right out of them. One of them picked at his paper napkin. Frank looked back at them. "You boys laughed at those scars. Do you even know what it means to earn scars like that?" The tallest one opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "You mocked a soldier, a hero, one of the few people in that hellhole who ran toward the fire when the rest were diving for cover." Monica took a small step back. Her eyes were glassy now, but she blinked it away. Frank turned to her again. "I never got to meet you. My daughter tried tracking you down after you rotated home, but she heard you left the army early." "I did," Monica said, voice soft. "Too many surgeries. Got med-boarded out in 2013. "Where'd you go?" "Bounced around. Landed here about 2 years ago." Frank looked down, lips pressed tight. "Becky passed last year. Lung infection. VA didn't catch it in time, but she never forgot what you did. She kept a picture of your convoy crew on her fridge. You standing next to her, both of you grinning like fools in body armor." Monica let out a slow, uneven breath. Her hands were still, but her jaw clenched like she was fighting something back. "Tell me something," Frank said, still facing her. "All this time, why didn't you tell anyone?" She shrugged. "They already had their story. I was just the scarred waitress. That's easier for folks to understand than what really happened." Frank turned back to the room. His voice rose just a bit, not yelling, but commanding. "Every person in this room should be thanking her, not staring, not whispering, not laughing." He looked directly at the 4 men, especially not mocking. One of them finally mumbled, "We didn't know." Frank stared hard. "Then maybe shut your mouth until you do." But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, thick with realization. The room held its breath. Monica didn't move at first. You could tell she was still sorting through the moment, half remembering, half protecting herself. Her expression had shifted. The usual blank focus she wore during her shifts was gone, replaced by something more raw, unfiltered. She looked around, and for the first time really saw how many people had been watching her all along. People who never spoke to her, never made eye contact. Now they were all sitting still, eyes wide, forks down, coffee cooling in their cups. She glanced at the group of guys, and her voice finally came, calm but direct. You think I don't hear the things people say when they think I'm out of earshot? Every table, every day. One of the men looked up, guilt written all over his face. I never said nothing. You laughed, she cut in. Same thing. Her tone wasn't angry, just tired, like she'd carried that weight longer than anyone in the room could imagine. I've had people leave me coins like I'm some charity case, she said, eyes still scanning the room. Had women ask to switch servers. Had folks talk about me like I wasn't standing 2 feet away, like these scars meant I did something wrong. A woman near the back lowered her gaze, suddenly very interested in her coffee. Frank remained standing, his hand resting lightly on the top of his cane. Monica turned slightly toward him. I didn't know Becky passed. I'm sorry. Frank gave a small nod, his voice hoarse now. I wish she could have seen you again. She wanted to tell you thank you in person. Said she owed you her life. Monica swallowed hard, then pulled her sleeves up just a bit more. The ink on her inner arm, barely visible through the scarring, showed a unit insignia and a short phrase in all caps, no one left behind. Frank stared at it, then slowly sat back down on his stool, silent. One of the younger guys finally stood, tall red flannel shirt, still looking like he didn't quite know what to do with his hands. I didn't know, he said again, quieter this time. I'm sorry. Monica looked at him for a long second, not with anger, just with something honest, clear. Next time, don't wait to learn someone's story before treating them like a person. The kid gave a small nod and sat back down. The others didn't say anything. One of them just stared at the salt shaker like it held all the answers. The tension in the room hadn't vanished, but it shifted. It was no longer discomfort aimed at Monica. It was discomfort with themselves, and that was something people had to sit with. Frank leaned forward, elbows on the counter. You know, he said, looking out toward no one in particular, I've seen more brave women in uniform than most of you will meet in your lifetime. People like Monica didn't ask for applause. She just did her job. And when she got home, she didn't get a parade. She got judged, looked at sideways, because it's easier for folks to believe a story they made up than one they're too uncomfortable to ask about. He looked at Monica again. I'm glad I came in today. She gave a slight smile, the first real one of the day. You want another coffee? She asked, trying to shift the moment. Frank chuckled. Only if you promise not to set it on fire. A laugh broke from a couple tables, not mocking, genuine, relieved. Monica poured him a refill. Across the diner, an older woman at a corner table slowly raised her hand. I'll take another sweet tea, baby, she said gently, giving Monica a soft smile. And thank you. It was simple, but it meant something. But not everyone was ready to go back to normal just yet. The air inside Maggie's diner felt different now. It wasn't just quiet, it was thoughtful. Monica moved between tables with the same steady pace, but now people looked at her differently. They weren't avoiding her arms anymore. They weren't rushing to look away. If anything, they were looking closer, but not with judgment, with awareness, respect. Frank sat quietly, sipping his coffee, watching it all settle. At the table with the 4 young men, none of them spoke much. The one in the red flannel picked at the edge of his paper placemat. The others sat with hunched shoulders, like the weight of their own behavior had finally caught up to them. One of them, shorter than the rest, with shaggy hair and a face that looked younger up close, mumbled something almost too low to hear. I'm sorry for what I said earlier. Monica turned her head slightly toward him. He looked up. For real, I didn't know. I didn't think. Monica nodded once. That's the problem. Y'all never think. She didn't say it with venom, just matter of fact, like someone who had nothing left to prove. The kitchen bell dinged. Earl pushed 2 plates through the window, then paused. Monica, he said, voice flat but clear. You good? She met his eyes and gave him the smallest nod. He nodded back and went right back to flipping burgers. Monica dropped the orders off and came back around to Frank, who was now folding a napkin in his lap like he had something else on his mind. "You really dragged Becky out of that truck?" he asked. Monica looked down for a moment, thinking. "Yeah, there were 4 of us. We hit an IED. She was trapped in the back seat. Flames were coming in through the side panel." She paused, her voice quieter now. "I burned through my gloves. Skin was coming off my hands. Didn't even feel it till we got back to the fob." Frank exhaled slowly. "She said you stayed with her for hours, even after the medics came." "I didn't want her to be alone," Monica said. "Sometimes that's all we had out there, each other." Frank looked down at his coffee. "I hope you know you gave me years I wasn't supposed to get. Becky came home, had 3 good years with her boy before she passed. That's because of you." Monica didn't answer right away. She looked out across the diner, watching a couple in their 60s split a BLT. "I'm not used to being seen," she finally said. Frank nodded. "You are now." At a nearby booth, a teenage girl who'd been listening leaned over to her mom and whispered, "She's a soldier?" The mother whispered back, "Yes, baby, a real one." And suddenly, the whole place just felt different. It wasn't about applause. It wasn't about making Monica a hero for the sake of a headline. It was about finally acknowledging her, seeing her fully, not as a woman with scars, but as a woman with history, a story, a name worth knowing. And Monica? For the first time in a long while, she stood up just a little straighter, but she wasn't finished yet. There was one last thing she needed to say. Monica stood still for a moment near the coffee machine, one hand resting lightly on the handle of the pot. Her reflection in the chrome showed a tired woman, but not defeated, not invisible, not anymore. She turned back to the center of the diner and raised her voice, not loud, but firm enough to carry. "Before things go back to normal," she said, "there's something I want to say." Forks paused again, heads turned. "I didn't come here to be pitied, and I don't want a standing ovation," she said. "I took this job because it was available and because I needed to work. I serve food, I clean up after people, and I go home with sore feet just like anyone else." She walked a few steps forward. "But I also carried wounded men on my back through live fire. I watched friends lose limbs, lose their minds, lose their lives. I've held pressure on a femoral artery while praying to a God I wasn't sure was listening. And I've walked through this town for 2 years, hearing people call me damaged goods behind my back because of the way my arms look." Her voice didn't break. She didn't tear up. "I never asked anyone to know my story, but I also didn't expect so many people to make one up for me." Frank nodded from his seat, not interrupting, just letting her finish. She looked at the group of young men again, her eyes softer now, but still serious. "It's easy to laugh at someone when you think they're nothing. It's harder when you realize they're more than you'll probably ever be." The red flannel kid swallowed and looked down again. Then she looked around the room one last time. "You don't need to thank me for what I did over there, but if you take anything from today, just remember this. Don't assume you know someone's whole story just because you see one page." She took a deep breath, then walked back to the counter and poured a fresh cup for Frank, who smiled like he was looking at someone his daughter would have been proud to know. A few seconds passed, and then slowly, a man near the back gave a quiet clap. Someone else followed. It wasn't a cheer, it wasn't loud, but it was real. Monica didn't bask in it. She just offered a small smile and went back to work. Frank finished his coffee and stood up, sliding a 20 under his cup. "Take care of yourself, soldier," he said. Monica gave a short nod. "You too, sir." He stepped toward the door, and as he passed the 4 young men, he paused just long enough to say, "Do better." They all nodded without speaking. As the bell jingled and Frank walked out into the thick heat, the door shut behind him, but the weight of what happened stayed behind like steam off a stovetop. Inside, things went on. But something had shifted. Maybe not the whole town, maybe not forever. But in that room, in that moment, eyes were opened. And Monica? She wasn't just the woman with the scars anymore. She was the woman with the story. Next time you see someone who looks different, who acts quiet, who doesn't fit what you expect, pause before you judge. Ask before you assume. Because behind every scar, behind every silence, there might be a story worth listening to. Treat people with dignity. It costs you nothing. and it could mean everything to them.